When compared to how they performed in World, all the weapons in the Monster Hunter Rise demo are much stronger than they used to be. The changes to each weapon range from interesting and useful to absolutely broken. Some notable examples are the Charge Blade's counter peak performance, which refills your files and sets you up for an attack, the Switch Axe's Switch Charger, which launches you forwards, fills your switch gauge, and makes it so that it won't decrease for a while. And the longswords? Well, everything about the longsword. More interesting, though, is the fact that almost every weapon has access to a counter now. Even though they are not all technically counters, they function like a counter in that they allow the hunter to avoid or mitigate damage, they put the hunter in a position to attack after avoiding said damage, and most importantly, they do not interrupt the flow of combat. So a good example is the Switch Axe. Switch Charger isn't a counter in the traditional sense, but it does have iframes, it lets you position yourself where you want to be, and it lets you attack with the axe or you can switch to the sword, according to what you need. It is versatile and awesome, and it's a stark contrast to what the Switch Axe had before, which was basically nothing. To some degree, all the weapons have something like this, and it makes them much stronger than they were in their previous World iterations. And that's before I even mention the other silk binds that we'll have access to in the full game, and the fact that each weapon will have aspects of its moveset be choosable. This adds layers of complexity and customization that are reminiscent of Generations Ultimate. The Rise Hunter kept all of the quality of life changes from World, buffed all the weapons, gave us wirebug maneuverability, and then gave us Generation Ultimate Hunter Arts equivalents and customization options. The Rise Hunter is truly overpowered, but I don't mean that as a criticism. After all, for most weapons, the combat has never felt better. The silk binds transition smoothly into the core moveset, and each weapon having a counter gives hunters more decisions to make in the heat of battle, which in my opinion is almost always a good thing. So my point ultimately is that yes, the Rise Hunter is overpowered. But that begs the question, why is the Rise Hunter overpowered? What could the game throw at us that would warrant power on this scale? Scary thought, isn't it? Because the answer is obvious. It will balance things out by giving us harder monsters. Now, this really isn't an issue. Monster Hunter is not a series that is known for being easy. Half the reason that I enjoy it is that I like getting my teeth kicked in and figuring out how to overcome obstacles. But then the question becomes, how are the monsters going to be harder? There really are two ways they could go about this. They could make the monster attacks more complex and erratic. They can also add in attacks that take advantage of the hunter's newfound maneuverability and verticality. A good example that is already implemented is Mizuzune shooting its water beam as it slides across the ground. It seems designed to be avoided by quick thinking and use of the wirebug. I think we can expect to encounter more and more situations where we'll have to make use of wirebugs in this way for monster hunts. I can easily imagine some monsters making parts of the floor untraversable for a while, or attacks we'll have to climb to avoid, things of that nature. There is, however, a second way that they could increase the difficulty. But the second way is more controversial, let's say. Back during Iceborne, the release of Elatrion was an interesting time for the Monster Hunter community. There were a lot of people who just did not like it at all, and they made sure that everybody knew about it. The main points of contention, as I understood them, was the Eschaton Judgment, the fact that there was a DPS check at all, the use of instant death mechanics, and the fact that you needed to make an elemental damage build to fight it. People believed that such gameplay elements were unsuitable for Monster Hunter, and were borrowed ideas from MMO raids. Now the reason I mention this is because I believe the developers are going to include in Rise both the faster, more complex monster attacks that encourage the use of wirebugs, and the MMO mechanics that World experimented with. In fact, I'm quite sure they'll mix them together in interesting ways. For example, some one-shot attacks might only be avoidable by using the wirebug hang, or climbing terrain. It won't be every monster, of course. Like World, it will probably be reserved for late game when they want to give a monster a boss-like feel. But sparse or not, I'm willing to bet it will come to Rise in one form or another. Let me explain my reasoning. Yes, when Elatrion released there was a lot of backlash at Eschaton's judgment. How fast he moved, the DPS checks. It seemed that they were worried that Monster Hunter experimenting with MMO mechanics were setting a dangerous trend that could lead to them becoming a staple in future Monster Hunter titles. The thing is, I don't think those people were being alarmist at all. I think their instincts were absolutely right. There were similar complaints after Extreme Behemoth, but those complaints did nothing to motivate Capcom. They still used those mechanics for Elatrion and Safi'jiiva. Likewise, even after the very vocal criticisms of Elatrion, Fatalis released with both an insta-kill move and a semi-DPS check, and that if you don't break the horns by the third phase, the Fire Breath will probably one-shot you, even with basic attacks. I think the early Elatrion hate was overblown, and I think Capcom knows that. Even some of those early posters know that they jumped the gun on Elatrion. You can find them in forums admitting that they, after some practice, really enjoyed Elatrion, and it turned out to be one of the more fun monsters. The so-called MMO mechanics also aren't really a problem if implemented well. You can tell, because Fatalis was a very popular monster, despite the fact that he used some of those mechanics and was also hard as shit. So yeah, I think there's a lot to suggest that they'll use those MMO mechanics they've been experimenting with in a more refined form, to increase the difficulty of Rise. Altogether, I predict that Rise will have faster, more erratic monster move pools, DPS checks, one-hit attacks, moves designed to be avoided by wirebugs, and they may even mix things up by having moves that can only be avoided by wirebugs. Now obviously this is all just speculation, but I think it's not without reason. And if I'm right, Monster Hunter Rise could very well turn out to be much, much harder than World. Or at least have the hardest monsters in the endgame and the inevitable DLC. And in my opinion, that is a very good thing. World often felt too easy. I like mindlessly killing monsters as much as the next guy, but every once in a while, I would like to be forced to have to stop, and realize what I'm doing isn't working, and have to change my strategy or build. It's nice to occasionally have to fight a monster that is so difficult you just can't do it with randoms. It doesn't have to be for every fight, but God, make me coordinate with the team sometimes. It's okay to be stumped by the monster. That's part of the process, I feel. Extreme Behemoth did that for me. So did Ancient Leshen, Elatrion, and Fatalis, and those happen to be my very favorite fights. When I consider the tools that the Rise Hunter has available to him, it makes me optimistic, and I believe that Rise will give me lots of opportunities to feel that same feeling again. Alright, and that's the end of my video. Once again, if my opinions haven't alienated you yet, I'm sure I'll get to you in a future video. As always, thank you for listening.